one thing that fascinated me when we were in Orlando, when you were having these discussions, is the issues with looking at it through a parental alienation or looking at it through a domestic violence lens. So one side argues that you first need to look for domestic violence, and that's where it needs to start. The other side says, well, we need to look at parental alienation. With the resist refuse, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's we look at them at the same time. Can you explain the difference from maybe an individual who looks at it through a parental alienation lens or a domestic violence lens versus yourself, who you look at it you analyze everything at the same time?
So if you have a point of view, if you're a domestic violence advocate or you're an alienation advocate and you see a resist refuse phenomenon, your mindset is to presume that, let's say you're an alienation advocate, to presume it's alienation unless shown otherwise. If you're a DV advocate, to presume it's DV unless shown otherwise. And scientifically and from a forensic psychology perspective, those introduce biases. There are multiple reasons children come to be disaffected from their parent. Yes, alienation happens. It does. Although, to be honest with you, alienation is difficult to accomplish in a parent-child relationship that has previously been successful. So alienation it does happen. I've seen it happen in cases, but if I had a dime for every time it's been claimed that that's the source, that it didn't turn out to be the source, I would be a wealthy guy. Mm-hmm. So we think in terms of other things as well. One of the most common, in my experience and from the literature, and powerful reasons that children resist and refuse is because of the conflict between their parents. So when children have two parents who are at war about the child, that is an enormous source of strain to a child and stress to a child. The greatest risk to children when a family separates, aside from neglect, abuse, or just really incompetent parenting, the greatest risk is conflict about the children into which they're drawn. And we see this going on a lot. And so what tends to happen in cases like this is that many children choose to align with one of their two parents. Let me give you a visual. So we've got a mom and a dad who are constantly at battle with each other, constantly having conflict, blaming each other, accusing each other, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I'm talking about because you and I see it in our offices every day. Mm-hmm. Think of these two parents like two people having a pistol duel. So they're both constantly standing, facing each other with a gun pointed at one another. Okay, keep that visual in mind. Where do we want children? In ideally, we don't want children aligned with mom. We don't want children aligned with dad. We want children in the middle, that with a good relationship with each parent. So if I'm a child and I've got dad constantly lobbing rounds at mom and I'm in the middle, I can be struck by incoming rounds from either side. I have no safe place to hide. What am I going to do as a child to protect myself? I'm going to pick a parent to hide behind. I'm going to align with one of my two parents so that I can shield myself from the conflict. Well, which parent do I choose? Well, there's a lot of reasons a kid might choose a particular parent. But they can be simple things and innocuous things like gender, like temperament, like one parent having more lax rules at the house, or one parent having more access to financial resources and being able to buy a child more things or afford a child more opportunities, trips to Disneyland, movies, clothing, whatever it happens to be. So alignment with one parent because of the conflict between the parents is a very powerful and a very common source of resist refuse. And I want to remind you, especially for younger children, again, I'm going to give you a visual. We have all, well, I'm older than many of you, I'm sure, grew up with the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote. Remember? And they'd be running through the
Yep.
desert in the Southwest, and they'd hit, they'd have these kind of mesas, and then there'd be a big chasm between the two, and you'd have to jump across the mesa or fall all the way down. Well, think of it this way: when Johnny goes to transition between mom's and dad's house, and there's war between the homes, every transition is a leap across that abyss, a leap across that chasm. The child is afraid they'll fall, but the other thing that's going on in the bottom is there's a raging inferno going on, and the fire and the flames are licking at the heels of the child as they leap over the chasm. What does that child do? Says, I'm not jumping. I'm staying right where I am. That's a form of alignment. Sometimes children prefer another parent because that parent's temperament aligns more with the child's temperament. Imagine, for example, that we've got a fearful, anxious, kind of fretty child and a more protective parent. Imagine we've got a child who's really rambunctious, rough and tumble, wants to get out there and do things, and we've got a parent who loves to be outdoors, loves to do all that kind of stuff. Imagine a child with learning disabilities and a parent who's more patient or more skilled at working with the child and with their homework and working with the child at the child's place where they're at. So that's another reason children can align. Children align because of a mentally ill parent. That's a little scary. Children align sometimes because a parent has an alcohol or a drug problem. So you can see that rather than saying, well, there's resist refuse here, it must be alienation, it must be domestic violence, it can be a combination of factors. It can be a combination of factors. And in my experience, in most cases that I see with resist refuse, indeed, there are a combination of factors going on. There's multiple areas that need attention. There can be a little alienation taking place. There can be a little bit of what we call realistic estrangement, where a child is resisting a parent because the parent is weird and makes the child uncomfortable. Maybe there's some alienation going on, and there's some history of verbal violence in the family. So there's a lot of factors here, and so simple solutions are rarely accurate in these cases. Complex solutions tend to be more accurate. Unfortunately, the legal system loves simple solutions because they're fast, and the human brain loves to oversimplify in complex situations, especially when the complex situation has a very powerful emotional component to it. So
Yeah.
we need to stay careful not to fall into these shortcuts to sort out what's going on here. And that's why I would say that my point of view about resist refuse is resist refuse. Let's see what's going on. Let's not assume what's going on.
I think that's a few minutes that's going to need to be clipped and replayed and replayed.